Hi, I'm Stacey Gordon, and I'm a human capital consultant with recruiting expertise who specializes in diversity and inclusion.
Hi, Stacey. I'm Scribe. So, human capital, you say? I understand that is a business term, but all the same, it sounds awfully dehumanizing. Regardless, you specialize in diversity and inclusion. Those are my favorites. So, I am looking forward to this presentation.
I spent years working in Fortune 500 companies and nonprofit organizations where I focused on issues related to a lack of diversity.
A lack of diversity. All right, well, now we just need you to define for us what diversity means and how you have advised businesses to insert diversity into their human capital.
One of the reasons I'm excited to be discussing diversity in recruiting is simply because we're talking about the topic at all. Often discussions about race, gender, pay equity, and discrimination are to be avoided in the workplace.
Race, gender, pay equity, and discrimination. So, are those the things that constitute diversity in this iteration? So, your job is to help companies infuse their workforces with certain races, certain genders, all the while addressing pay equity and discrimination. Discrimination like hiring people on the basis of their race and/or their gender, perhaps?
But not today. And I'm hoping that if you stick with this course, by the end, you'll be just as excited as I am about how this topic can enhance your candidate pipeline.
Yes. I've actually had to link 2 different videos together that form an introduction to an online course in diversity recruiting. Now, the full course is about an hour long and costs money to get access to. And so, being the cheapskate that I am, I'll only be looking at this slightly long overview of the course materials featuring our speaker. If you'd like to see both of the videos I am referencing here, there are links in the description. But let's continue.
What is diversity? According to Merriam-Webster, it's the quality or state of having many different forms, types, ideas, etc., or the state of having people who are different races or who have different cultures in a group or organization.
Ah, so diversity is the quality of being of a different type of person based on race or culture, and diversity recruitment is the process by which you hire diverse people. So, hiring people based on their race or culture. Got it.
Therefore, diversity recruiting is the act of recruiting diverse individuals into a group, organization, or company. Discussions about diversity have the potential to pull you outside of your comfort zone while making you think.
Well, if my comfort zone is defined as operating within the law, then yes, discussions about diversity recruitment would indeed make me think that I was tempting fate in violating the law.
So my goal is to lessen the discomfort, open a dialogue, and help you make different choices throughout the recruiting process while providing you with tools to enhance the diversity of the global workforce one hire at a time.
So, you're here to make companies feel better about hiring people on the basis of factors other than merit. That is a fascinating line of work. Let's hear some more.
Have you ever applied for a job, and as you spent the hour or so it can sometimes take to fill out a job application, you're wondering if your experience mattered?
Well, is it any better a scenario to end up being hired for a job and still have to wonder if your experience really mattered?
In the back of your mind, you were thinking, this is probably a pointless exercise.
In the back of your mind, did you wonder if maybe you were only hired to improve the optics of workplace diversity?
No? Well, women, candidates of color, veterans, professionals with a disability, non-heterosexual candidates, and older professionals all struggle with this. They want to know they are being assessed on their skills and not being immediately rejected because of a particular dimension of diversity.
Well, they should also not be hired on the basis of their possessing a particular dimension of diversity. Diversity, which has now been more finely defined for us as anyone who is not white and or straight and or male and or abled and or young and or a non-military civilian. Got it.
The act of diversity recruiting isn't really any different than regular recruiting.
Then why give it a different name?
What is different is the mission and vision as well as the expected outcome. Diversity recruiting is the active commitment to increase diversity within an organization. It's a concerted effort to overcome the traditional lens we are conditioned to look through and move toward engaging candidates who are not usually on your radar for any number of reasons.
So, diversity recruiting is meant to reject the traditional lens and what? Replace it with a non-traditional lens? A lens of looking for people based on their race, or gender, or orientation, not just the race, gender, or orientation you deem undesirable? Is that what I am to understand here?
Each individual step in the diversity recruiting process impacts your desired outcome as a whole. Therefore, in order to create a successful process, your steps have to mimic those of the general recruiting process, with deliberate attempts to act without bias.
So, wait a second. Diversity recruiting needs to mimic a standard recruiting process while being instilled with a specific outcome. So, our speaker is advising companies that their hiring systems need to be rigged in favor of people based on race and gender, but she understands the need to make the process appear like it is not rigged. Doesn't that pretty much confess that what you are advising take place has to be hidden, has to be kept covert, because otherwise you could easily be accused of breaking civil rights laws?
In each of the main steps in recruiting, the job description, your sourcing, screening and interview process, you have to remain aware that bias, discriminatory practices, and unsavory behaviors all lurk there, and be committed to identifying and overcoming those behaviors.
So you have to assume beforehand that standard hiring practices are already corrupted by a bias towards non-diversity. And so, in order to combat this, you need to make a conscious effort to ensure recruitment outcomes defy those assumed biases. You need to make a conscious effort to hire people based on race, gender, and orientation. Got it.
Take the example of a guy with a beard who is applying for a job. You assume that no one cares if a guy has a beard. We might care if it's bushy, extremely long, or dyed purple. But if you have a general, run-of-the-mill beard, no one gives it a second thought, right?
Right?
Unless you're considering running for President of the United States. There hasn't been a single president with a beard in more than 100 years. Is that a coincidence? Or would you say that the people of the United States have a bias towards men without beards? If you could run for president, would you consider shaving your beard in order to have a higher chance of success?
Well, I don't know. Apparently, almost no one alive today has had the option to vote for a president with a beard. So, how could you or I say that people wouldn't vote for someone with a beard? What kind of point was that supposed to make? That not having the opportunity or reason to do something thus equates to being opposed to that thing? Because if that's the path of logic that we are on, it is going to be a very bumpy ride.
Think about that for a moment. You are highly qualified to be president. You meet all of the criteria. You are in great health and ready to take on the world, literally. But you are spending time wondering if your beard would prevent you from even being considered as a candidate.
So, our speaker is advising us to not worry about inconsequential optics, as it is a waste of energy. Instead, it is better to find confidence in your own personal merits. And so, why can't a company have that same attitude? Why can't a company focus more on the quality of their products and services than on the inconsequential optics of whether they are diverse enough or not? I am getting some really mixed messages here.
This makes your sourcing process extremely important because as a recruiter, you have to overcome the perception in the marketplace that candidates who haven't traditionally been hired by your company are actually welcome. You have to actively source, get out and meet people, and let them know your company is interested in a candidate like them.
So, companies have to actively pursue the recruitment of people solely on the basis that they do not physically resemble the bulk of their current workforce in order to prove that they are not as discriminatory as you say they appear to be. Got it.
The CEO is another example. Of the 479 male CEOs of Fortune 500 companies in the U.S., monosyllabic names were most prevalent.
Monosyllabic names. So now, names are a problem, but only for male CEOs. Got it.
Pete was at the top, followed by Bob, Jack, Bruce, and Fred. Is there a bias against men named Jeffrey or Thomas?
I don't know. Is there?
Have they shortened their names to Jeff and Tom coincidentally?
I don't know. Have they?
Where does this come into play in the recruiting process? Who is doing your screening? How are they trained? What traits are they told to look for?
Well, apparently in the diversity recruitment process, they are trained to look for anyone who isn't male, white, or straight. Which isn't any kind of bias, of course.
Of course!
Simply by being aware of the bias, you may find that more resumes with names like Jeremy or Bartholomew, or even Keisha or Jamal, make it past the screening process.
Oh, of course.
Of course!
Standard hiring practices are inherently racist, sexist, and, nameist?
Let's backtrack for a moment to what is usually one of the first steps in the recruiting process, designing the job description. It is supposed to attract candidates, but if it contains sexist language or information that is common only to a specific community, you are inadvertently discouraging candidates from ever applying, thereby narrowing your candidate pool before you even begin. So encouraging a candidate to apply in the first place by reviewing and revising your job descriptions is part of what you have to tackle in a diversity recruitment initiative.
Job description language that is sexist and or exclusionary of specific communities. Well, I would love to be shown examples of such things, but we are never provided such.
This is why each step in the recruitment process needs to be reviewed and revised as appropriate. Otherwise, you can be sabotaging your outcomes before you've even begun.
Well, golly. I feel so much more educated now. Our speaker professionally teaches companies how to insinuate discriminatory hiring practices into standard recruitment processes. Because, obviously, the answer to doing away with presumed discrimination is to explicitly discriminate in order to make sure a company possesses the correct look of its workforce. But I have a newsflash for our speaker. If everything being advised here were enacted into a company's documented hiring procedures, that would constitute multiple violations of federal civil rights laws. But this is apparently accepted practice. This is apparently the new normal. This is apparently something you can get paid to teach companies to do. This is apparently the kind of thinking permeating the minds of the corporate world these days. Diversity and inclusion? More like uniformity and exclusion. Seeking to do right by some by doing wrong to others. A recipe for a fair and just society. Or, at least, so our speaker is telling us. As always, thank you for watching.